Thank you so much for joining us for this first session of our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Learning Series for Internship Supervisors. This three-part series is designed to help you gain critical insights and develop new skills that can help you fully support your intern this summer and build a more inclusive culture. We're so excited to have you all with us. If you've just joined, welcome. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the Zoom chat by briefly sharing your name, your title, your company, and whether you're working with a step-up high school age intern this summer or an intern from Achieve College Internships. My name is Shamayne Braman. I'm the Senior Director of Internships and Partnerships at Achieve Twin Cities. And in just a couple of minutes, I'll be handing things over to Shamayne Braman to lead today's session on mentorship and relationship building. But before I do so, I want to take a moment to briefly introduce Achieve Twin Cities and provide some context for today's session. For over 20 years, Achieve has been rallying our community in support of young people and delivering best-in-class programs that inspire and equip young people for careers, college, and life. We are guided in this mission by strong values and a vision of a future in which young people have full and equitable access to post-secondary education and career opportunities, which we know is so critical to creating a more just and vibrant community. Achieve offers 3 integrated programs to provide support in career and college readiness for young people with an extreme equity focus, providing resources and support to address our community's wide disparities in education, college access, and employment. For our career and college centers, Achieve is the sole universal career and college readiness provider for Minneapolis Public Schools and St. Paul Public Schools, with services available to all 18,000 students in over 25 schools. Our professional team of school-based career and college readiness coordinators create a supportive space for young people to access expert guidance and resources on their path to post-secondary and career success, including one-on-one advising and a wide range of career and college exploration opportunities. We connect students with 2- and 4-year colleges, apprenticeships, training programs, and many other post-secondary options. Many of you are very likely familiar with our work on the Step Up Youth Employment Program and may well have a Step Up intern in your workplace with you today. Step Up is a partnership of the City of Minneapolis, Achieve Twin Cities, Minnesota DEED, and Project for Pride in Living. And we provide together hundreds of Minneapolis youth ages 14 to 21 with the opportunity to explore great careers through paid internships, work readiness training, and on-the-job mentoring. Step Up has created over 31,000 career opportunities since 2003, partnering with over 200 employers in 15 industries to help build a more skilled, diverse, and equitable economy and workforce for us all. Finally, our newest career and college readiness program is Achieve College Internships, which connects talented, diverse college juniors with high-quality paid summer internships, professional training, mentors, and career networks at local companies and organizations. Established in 2020, Achieve College Internships helps young professionals launch their careers in the Twin Cities and provides opportunities for employers to discover and support new talent. Our interns include Step Up alums, Minneapolis and St. Paul Public Schools graduates, and scholars of the Minnesota Private College Fund's Black Men's Success Initiative. If you are partnered with Achieve Twin Cities in support of our mission and students, I want to thank you for being part of this work. And if you are working with one of our interns through Step Up or Achieve College Internships this summer, this session and our summer learning series was developed especially for you. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Today's DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Learning Series session will cover 3 critical aspects in developing a strong relationship with your intern and engaging effectively as a mentor, while providing opportunities for us all to break out and reflect together and discuss with fellow attendees while asking questions of our presenter. There will be a set time for questions near the end of the program, but questions can also be addressed throughout the session, and we encourage you to put questions into the chat at any time. You are welcome to leave your camera on throughout the session, but you are also totally free to do whatever works best for you. Please remember to stay muted during the presentation segments, but you're welcome to come off mute for the discussions, of course. It's now my privilege to introduce Shamayne Braman. Shamayne is the Chief People Officer at Sonos, where she leads the company's staff recruitment, development, engagement, and retention strategies, in addition to cultivating the Sonos culture across 15 offices globally. She also leads diversity, equity, and inclusion for the company at large, championing strategies and initiatives across people, products, and policies that embrace diversity, foster inclusion, and fuel business outcomes. Before joining Sonos, Shamayne was the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Target, where she was responsible for driving organizational strategies that advanced Target's DEI's priorities and goals across the stores, global supply chain, and headquarters. Her past experiences also include global DEI roles at Thomson Reuters and leadership roles with Teach for America. Shamayne is currently Vice Chair of the board at Achieve Twin Cities and sits on the board of Penumbra Theater and the Executive Committee of the Twin Cities Diversity and Inclusion Roundtable. A New Jersey native, Shamayne holds a bachelor's degree in English from Princeton University and a master's degree in education policy and management from Harvard University. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you, Shamayne, for joining us to lead today's discussion. Please, Shamayne, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. That is a good reminder to shorten my bio so that we can delve into the conversation sooner. So I've got a to-do coming out of this conversation. In a moment, I'm going to share my screen, but I just want to start first with thanking Jeremiah for that introduction and also echoing his gratitude to each of you for your partnership with Achieve and for all of the work that you do to lead and engage with interns over the course of the summer and these really exciting experiences for our young people here in the Twin Cities. I'm going to share my screen, and in a moment, I'm just going to talking and screen sharing at the same time are dangerous activities. So just give me a moment. All right. Hopefully everyone can see this thumbs up that it's coming through clearly. Perfect. So just by way of a brief introduction, as Jeremiah shared, I have the privilege of serving as the Vice Chair of the Board of Achieve Twin Cities. And I began my career in education over a decade ago as a Teach for America core member. And while I'm no longer working directly with young people, for those first few years in the classroom, I think I have developed a lifelong respect and appreciation for the craft that is helping a young person grow and develop and find their way in the very big systems that we have in this country. And in previous roles that I've held, I've had my own step-up interns and suspect that perhaps like many of you, the experience of sort of being humbled by the brilliance of the young people that we have here in the Twin Cities is really transformational. And so I'm so grateful to be able to connect back with this community in this way for this conversation. Today, as Jeremiah mentioned, I serve as the Chief People Officer for Sonos, and we are a company based out of Santa Barbara, which is the reason that I don't have an intern right now, but we are obsessed with creating products and experiences that help us listen more deeply, that help us move more freely, and really help people experience the joy of brilliant sound. I share my teaching background to start our conversation today for two reasons. First, because I think it's relevant context for our discussion today, which I'll delve into in more detail in just a moment. But the second reason is because this is not going to be a 20-minute lecture or presentation. This is, my hope is that this is going to be an experience that is a two-way conversation, that we will actively be engaged. Feel free to turn your cameras on so that we can see your faces and see your reactions to the conversation. And I really invite you to, if you have something or someplace where you can jot down notes throughout the conversation, because I'll ask folks to engage in some reflection, some individual reflection before we head into our breakout groups. And those will be moments where you can turn off the camera and I'll signal to you when those moments are coming up. I also, as Jeremiah mentioned, invite you to put questions in the chat, but I also invite you to put reactions to anything that you're hearing in the chat, any thoughts you have to contribute to the conversation. I am a firm believer that my job today is to really curate a space for us to learn from the collective wisdom of everyone that's in this virtual space, as opposed to simply digesting slides that I am offering to the group. So I want to start by just leveraging a little bit of my personal experience, not necessarily as a supervisor or a chief people officer, but as a young Black woman working in corporate spaces over the course of the last few years. Although I never really formally participated in an internship program like Step Up or Achieve College internships, I do suspect that growing up, many of my lived experiences perhaps overlap with some of the young people, with many of the young people that we have here in the Twin Cities. I grew up just outside of Newark, New Jersey. I was the daughter of immigrants, and although both of my parents went to college outside of the United States, the experience of sort of navigating the college system and the professional world here in the States was sort of like you're on your own. We don't necessarily have the playbook for that. And so over the course of my career, I have really benefited from managers who brought what I would call a mentorship mindset to our managing relationships. So let me just share briefly 3 with you. My first manager, we'll call her T, made clear that first and foremost, she wanted to see me succeed. She would always send me calendar invitations to events that she was asked to speak at or asked to attend, just so that I could shadow her and see and hear and get exposure to things that were years away from me in my career. And then she'd ask my opinion about the programming, but really built that foundational relationship. After T, I had the chance to work with someone, we'll call him A, and he did something that no manager has ever done for me, which is he made the invisible in corporate America visible. So when I asked him what it took to be successful at our company, he gave me sort of like, here are the 3 things that you need to be paying attention to at any given moment. And then he helped me leverage those tools to navigate my career within the organization. And then finally, I had a manager, we'll call this manager P, who was just really direct. The expectations were always really, really high, but there was this sense that, and I was always accountable to delivering, but there was the sense that we were a team, that we would stay close and connected, and I was never on my own in delivering against those expectations. To be clear, I've had many supervisors and managers outside of those 3, but the reason that those 3 stand out to me is because they, as leaders, shared something that was different than other managers or supervisors I had, which was they had an expanded view of what the role of manager could be in terms of my growth and development as a young person, and particularly as a young person working in an environment that was where folks did not primarily share my racial or ethnic background, and what that might mean for me as someone from an underrepresented background. They cared as much about how I was doing as they did about what I was doing and delivering, and really created a foundation that shifted, that resulted in a shift for how they led me. So today's discussion is not going to be about sort of that formal mentee mentorship pairing, how to find one, who's responsible for what, how to schedule that time together. Instead, what I'm going to offer for us is how do we bring the mindset of what a good mentor brings to a mentoring relationship into our management and leadership style in order to support interns who may need more from us than sort of what a traditional management relationship might look like in order to be successful. So we're going to pull the principles of a mentorship mindset into our supervisory relationships and the leadership of our interns. To do that, let's talk a little bit about what we mean when we say more than a manager. Traditionally, when we think about a manager, we can oftentimes sort of a tops-down approach comes to mind, where the manager has 100% power in the relationship. And you can think about power as sort of the autonomy to decide what happens next, what they do next. Managers set the goals, they measure the results, they assess performance, and there's not really a ton of input from the employee. And this can kind of happen on day one. Whether it is effective or not as a standalone mentorship, as a standalone management style is a question, but it's certainly something that can happen on day one. A mentorship mindset, in contrast, shares the power balance with the manager, or starts to distribute some of that power balance between the manager and the subordinate. The manager is still very much guiding the relationship and the decisions, but they're doing so through consultation and advice. And the reason this can't happen on day one is because it requires the foundation of a relationship. And then you have leadership styles like coaching, where the coach takes the foundational relationship, but also has an experienced employee who really just needs questions to help them figure out what to do next, as opposed to the manager taking the lead on that. Where I'd love to start in terms of engaging this group of folks is I want you to take a moment to consider your own experiences of leadership. Reflecting on the span of your career, what leadership mindsets have you most experienced? And you don't have to think about just your current role. So this isn't like a moment to sort of like name what your current manager does, but think about your career, the arc of your career. What kinds of management do you think you've most experienced? And I'd love to see just a few thoughts in the chat. This is a great moment for us to pause. Would love to see just what sorts of leadership styles you've experienced, and feel free to pop your responses in the chat. We'll take a moment to see what's there. of these three? And one thing I'll offer for my teaching days is wait time is real. So we will wait it out so we can have some engagement in this conversation. Mentorship mindset, half managers, half mentors. Great. What else? Has anyone gotten the full spectrum mentorship mindset? Great. Wonderful. So it seems like folks have had exposure to managers who are sort of bringing this mentorship mindset. Excellent. So what I'm also really curious about, and some people have seen mostly management, what I'm also curious about is when you think about your own, this one I'm not going to ask you to put in the chat, but when you think about your own leadership style or your own management style, what mindset do you most default to? So are you most comfortable in the management space, in the mentoring space, or in the coaching space? Just take a moment. You can either think about it or jot it down somewhere, but just hold on to that in terms of where your default tends to be. And what I want to offer is that each of these leadership mindsets unlocks a specific set of tools in our toolkit. Our focus today is going to be on building the mentorship mindset, but that's not to say that there actually isn't a role for all three of these at various points or in various moments in management or in a supervisory relationship. There might be times, for instance, when you're performance managing someone who isn't meeting expectations and you actually need sort of that first management mindset. Coaching is too much autonomy for that person. There also may be moments when you have a more experienced employee and coaching is the exact right lever to pull. And so these are all tools within the leadership toolkit. The focus of today's conversation is going to be delving into sort of that middle mindset and what it looks like to unlock that with our interns. So let's spend just a few moments defining it. And that was like a warm up. So please get ready to continue to add thoughts and perspective into the chat. Like I said, this is going to be an engaging, hopefully an engaging session where folks are leaving their perspective and bringing their perspective to the table. Now, none of us succeeds alone. We do so with the help of others. So the first thing that I want you to do is spend just a moment. I shared folks, 3 people who came to mind immediately at the start of our conversation, who have left an indelible impact on my career. And I'd like to invite each of us to do the same. So just take a moment to think about someone who has really made an impact on you and on your career or on your professional journey. And I want you to think about how they supported you. So what traits did they have? What things did they do that still resonate with you? Maybe what steps they took. And take just a moment to capture that. And I'm going to ask for some thoughts in the chat in a moment. And I'd like you to just distill their traits or their impact down to just one word. So if you were to just capture what this person provided for you in one word, what would you say they did? And I'd love to see any thoughts that folks have in the chat. Care, resources, encouragement. I love that. What else? Trust, passion, opportunities, respect, communication, a push, 2 words. No problem. I forgive you, Kate. It's okay. Amazing. Kindness, empowerment, patience. Amazing. Please keep those coming. Appreciate the conversation. We are starting to paint the picture of a mentorship mindset. Advice, encouragement. A mentorship mindset really leverages the foundation of a trusted relationship and psychological safety to inspire, to teach, to draw out the best in a subordinate. I love that word push. I spent time thinking about like, what's the right? And I came up with draw out. I should have done this session and then refined it afterwards. I would say to push, to encourage, right? To sort of get the most out of someone. And I'm using the phrase subordinate, but you can replace that with a direct report, with a mentee, or with an intern, certainly in the context of Achieve. And they do this really in 3 ways. The first thing that they do is they build the foundation. So they establish that trust. The second thing that they do is they peel back the curtain. So they teach. This is where things like meeting someone where they are, providing opportunities, providing resources. And then the third thing that they do is that they are clear. So they communicate. And yes, we will delve much more deeply into that psychological safety in just a moment, because that's a key element of the trust. This is how we're going to structure our time together over the next hour or so. We're going to spend about 20 minutes in each of these. It won't be 20 minutes of me talking at you. We'll break into breakouts and have time to engage. So I'll offer a little nugget with each of these, and then we'll have time to digest a little bit more. But these are the three things that you sort of bring to this mentorship approach of leadership. And so let's start by delving into the first, which is building the foundation. Building a foundation, and particularly building a relationship with a young person, can be particularly challenging. And I say this both in my own experience, but also as a teacher, but also as I think about this in the context of young people in the workplace. Young people are moving in and out of a stage where they're very much still learning and growing, but they are also craving independence, autonomy, and privacy. And so the people who enter their lives are not automatically granted a right to information about who they are, about their thoughts, about their feelings. That has to be earned, and it's usually earned through that relationship building. Now, in the workplace, usually when we're building a relationship with someone, we usually start by, if you're like me, you usually start by asking questions, right? So tell me about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get to this stage in your career? Tell me about your background. You ask people to share information. You sort of extract information from them to really paint the picture. And that becomes, the beginning of that professional relationship. Sometimes at a team level, you'll do this with user manuals or personality assessments, or maybe DEI inclusion trainings where people are invited to share even more. But what I'd like to offer is that to build a relationship with a young person requires actually a different approach because of where they might be in their stage of development, as well as where particularly underrepresented young folks might be when it comes to existing in spaces where they're one of very few. And that is that we have to start first with taking the time to create the environment that primes that employee, that subordinate, whether it's a direct report or a mentee or a young person, to receive the coaching, the guidance, the support. Little can happen without that foundation in place. Now, every single person, whether you're young or old, new to a space or not, when you're walking into a space, you are usually consciously or unconsciously asking yourself about three questions. Am I safe here? Do I belong here? Am I treated with dignity and respect here? You're usually sort of always assessing that those three things are at play. Now, you might not be asking yourself those things out loud, and our young people may not be asking themselves those things out loud. But particularly for those who are still learning about themselves, these questions are on their minds. And so here's where I offer the distinction between how we might operate in professional settings, right, where we ask questions to glean information to relationship build, versus wearing a mentorship mindset in which you first prioritize creating the environment of psychological safety and establishing those conditions of trust and respect upon which a relationship can be built. And so that psychological safety is really about, I'm not afraid of others in this space. I feel like I can share without fear of what will happen next, without judgment or without any sense of retaliation. I can take risks, and I know that if I fail, I'll be supported in that failure. The sense of trust, the people here care about me. I have someone who has my back. I belong here. And then that sense of respect, which is, around my experiences and perspectives are valued, even if there is disagreement. So even if my folks don't necessarily do what I ask, I still feel heard. I'm sought out for my opinions, and I'm treated with dignity at all times, right? So those things need to be in place for that mentorship mindset to thrive and for that relationship to thrive. Now, the question is, how do you build it if you're not necessarily leaning into the traditional models of asking questions or here's a survey to fill out about yourself? And I love this quote, and I'm happy to share the source, but this idea that we all have context and history, and one of the ways that you draw out other people's context and history is by taking the time to be vulnerable with your own lens as an invitation for others to stretch theirs. And so what does that actually look like? One of the tools that we often used in the classroom was, and so this may not be a new concept to many of you on this call, but the idea of a relational bank account in which you have deposits and withdrawals. The deposits are usually things that you are doing to shore up that relationship, things that you are doing to contribute to that foundation, the psychological safety, the trust, the respect. You're putting, those are your inputs. Your withdrawals are times when you need to draw on that foundation, and it takes away a little bit of that relationship. Now, one thing I do want to clarify is that withdrawals don't necessarily have to be negative. And that's a huge misconception with this theory around sort of the relational bank account, because think about when you have an actual bank account and you go, sometimes you need to spend money. Sometimes you need to spend money on things that are important. So withdrawals aren't necessarily negative, any more than, taking money out of your own bank account is a bad thing to do. But if you withdraw without replenishment repeatedly, then you get into a place where the relationship starts to feel frayed, and that's dangerous territory. So think about withdrawals as simply anything that requires you to rely on that foundation of trust that you're built. Overused, it can turn standard interactions like feedback negative, but when used with a nice balance of deposits, it's actually very powerful in order to be able to get the most, in order to do what I think, who was it that said it earlier in the conversation, Kate, a push, in order to be able to have a push. So examples of deposits that don't require asking any questions at all. When you're introducing your intern, you can share, certainly this is so-and-so, they're our step up, or they're our college intern. And what would it take to simply add, in just a few short days, I've been so impressed by, right? Telling people what you've noticed about the intern as a part of how you introduce them to the network within your organization. Using self-deprecating humor as a way to demonstrate self-awareness and distribute some of that relational power. Vulnerability and storytelling. So being willing to share some of your early experiences professionally, whether they were your own experiences of being an intern, or some of your early career experiences, or even your story of how you got here. Resource sharing is another great way to do that. Have you heard about this? Have you seen this? This came across my desk and I immediately thought of you. Is another way to make a deposit into that relational account. Creating something together. So can you help me? I'm looking for the words to do X, Y, and Z. Can you help me think about what I might say in this email? Or can you take a look, asking for advice or opinion, or someone's opinion or help? Can you take a look at this and just let me know your thoughts? Sincere affirmations. I'm so glad you're here. I really appreciate your perspective, because I haven't been able to talk to someone who has X, Y, or Z background. You have been really good at helping me do X, Y, or Z, and then introducing them to your network at a point when it's appropriate to do so. Those are great ways to deposit into the account without necessarily leveraging any withdrawals. Now, withdrawals can be negative. So, a microaggression anytime, and I've offered an example of, mispronouncing someone's name, whether it's you or someone else. So I want us to think about withdrawals can be something that you do, but it can also be anything that anyone else does within that workplace that creates that starts to answer those questions for the intern around, am I safe here? Is this a place where I can be myself, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily just be that relationship with you that is withdrawing on that bank account. Autonomy before they're ready is another example of a withdrawal. Anytime you assign work or projects, right, that's a withdrawal, but a necessary withdrawal because that's what they're there to do. Feedback is a withdrawal, but it's an important withdrawal because that's how they'll learn and grow. And then communication, whether it's limited, distant, or perhaps results in a misunderstanding. Two reminders here I'd offer as we think about establishing that foundation. One is there's research that shows, whether it's parenting or any other kind of relationship, somewhere between 5 to 10 deposits to a withdrawal. And it also withdrawing doesn't mean that you aren't also, not withdrawing. Just because you're not asking questions about who someone is doesn't mean that you aren't learning about who they are, right? You still have opportunities to listen. You share a little about yourself as an invitation for them to share a bit about themselves as well. And you can use that withdrawal, right? So now you tell me about yourself as a way to sort of balance that ratio. What I'd love for us to do is just take about 8 to 10 minutes in a breakout and ask you to engage in the following questions. And I'll put these questions in the chat in just a moment so that you can reference them. But how much time have you spent establishing, or what does that look like for you to establish the psychological safety, trust, and respect with your intern? And how would you describe the strength of that foundation now? What deposits have you made or can you made to further strengthen that foundation? Have you made any withdrawals? And what does it look like to replenish that? And are there any challenges to establishing that foundation that you have encountered? We will spend a little bit of time in group discussion when we come back from this. So think about whoever the most courageous person in your group is, as they'll share back out. I'm going to stop my screen share, put this in the chat, and then Heidi will put us into breakouts, and we'll come back together in about 8 minutes. All right. Hopefully you all had some good conversation. I'm seeing smiles, and so that makes me think the discussion hopefully was rich. I'd love to hear from a couple of folks who were assigned to be the spokesperson for who had the privilege of that assignment to be the spokesperson for your group. What sorts of things did you all discuss in terms of what it looks like to develop that psychological safety or build that foundation? Any nuggets that came up in your conversations?
So that, Shamayne, the questions didn't transfer, but we were pretty sure the first question was like, what have you done to create psychological safety? So we did share on that.
Okay.
And one of the things that we do at Be the Match is in one of our first meetings where the supervisors are actually meeting with the interns, we have these about me boards where the supervisors share, and inversely we ask the interns to just share about themselves, like their whole person, not just the persona that shows up at work, but who are you as a person, not just an intern, not just a supervisor. And the supervisors go first to, show that vulnerability and bring in their whole selves to work. And then the following day we have the interns go.
I love that you give them a day in between so that they can sort of digest and prepare and think about that. So I love that example. Yeah. Katie.
Yeah, that's I'm already like jotting down notes because we do a kind of get to know you form that interns fill out, but I love the idea of our leaders filling it out first and for the interns to get a chance to see that. So thanks for the tip. We talked a little bit about making sure that interns have another contact who's not their direct supervisor or leader, who's in that more of a buddy role where they might feel a little bit safer asking some of those initial questions. We call them job coaches at Securian. They're really that day-to-day contact that they're really interacting with all the time. And then we also talked about, I guess I just offered in our group, I thought it was really valuable to shift the perspective that we often typically come into, how do you get to know someone? You ask them a bunch of questions. And so it was really good to get just some ideas on how to build psychological safety and trust with those concrete examples of deposits. And I love the idea of using an introduction as an opportunity to say hey, this is Katie and I've been so impressed with XYZ. It's just such an easy thing to do. And I can imagine myself as an intern just feeling so proud to get recognized for something early on and to have somebody see something in me. So that was great.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nicholas.
Hello. So our group pretty much, we went over the fact that it's very important to when you interact with an intern, you should always make sure that you kind of are on a more of a friendly basis with them. And we also said how important it is to also maintain the foundation you build with the supervisor as well. We were saying you don't have to be as friendly, but it's still good to be on a good foundation to have a deposit and withdrawal with as well. And with the internships, you want to be more cordial and friendly with them, just due to the fact that they're younger and this is they're probably their first internship as well. So it's good to have a good two separate foundations, one for the supervisor, one for the intern, but both you want to have a good basis to deposit and withdrawal from.
Yeah, I think you highlight such a good point that I would emphasize, which is, you can have a strong relationship and you can have that deposit withdrawal dynamic without actually becoming friend, right? The goal is not friendship because the power dynamic still exists and it's still a professional context, but it's accessibility in a way that allows the person to feel safe. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. Anything else? Any other thoughts? I loved those first few insights.
Our group talked a bit about how, and again, I think the roles that some of us were in the group, it was really easy to think about all of like the details and all of like the pieces of business that need to get taken care of for someone to start an internship. So I think it was a good reminder to think about, you know, making the deposits, building the trust prior to getting into all of the business that needs to happen. And then also from my slice of the puzzle, I think focusing mostly on intern recruiting, making sure that there are deposits made like from the very first experience that students have with our company to make it, you know, make sure we are a place they want to work, a place they're wanting to come back to because they've had that positive experience right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point that, you know, every interaction with the company is an opportunity for you're either making a deposit or withdrawal, one of those. There's rarely sort of that neutrality. And so how do you sort of stretch that concept, not just to the manager-intern relationship, but to the total experience the intern is having? Brenda, you'll be our last one, and then we'll delve into part 2.
Thanks, Shamayne. I wanted to make a comment on the deposit withdrawal proportion. That really struck me when you said 5 to 10 deposits for withdrawal as a guide. It just made me think of how important, in order to get to the point where it's okay for a withdrawal, to consider all of the body language moments, all of the subtle nonverbal ways that we can be depositing. I think of things like saying, I have an open door policy, and yet when someone comes to the door, if I look grumpy or overwrought or like I really don't have time for you right now, that's communicating and contradicting what I may have stated, right? So it just helps me to think of the whole 360 of what I'm presenting in that relationship in order to really have genuine deposits and growth happening before a withdrawal, or some withdrawals are coming next.
Yeah, absolutely. What the research actually says, and I can find the source and share it with folks after this. The research says that because this concept of deposit, and it's used in parent-child relationships, it's used in marriages or relationships of that sort. So if you're having an argument, 5 to every 1, because the person is already primed for negative interactions. And if it's sort of a neutral moment, then it's usually 10 to 1. So that it's an interesting, I love your point around body language, because deposits don't always have to be an overt thing you say. It can also be how you choose to show up. Otherwise, the tax on you, right, can also be quite high. And so that's something to consider. Thank you so much for the engagement on part 1. Really appreciate the thoughts. Let's talk about item 2. And just because I can see my screen does not mean that you can see my screen. So give me just a moment to get it together. I entered my 4-year-old's body, which is how she sees the world, and thought, if it's true for me, it must be true for everyone else. Okay, let's talk about peeling back the curtain. Peeling back the curtain is sort of the second thing that we can do in this environment of wearing that mentorship mindset as we're engaging with our interns. One of the things that good mentors do, and I talked about this in the beginning example with my own leaders, is they make the invisible visible, which means they take the time to break down for us things that people might assume that we understand or didn't think that we necessarily were ready to understand or to digest. But before we talk exactly about what those things are, let's talk about what it means to make the invisible visible. So I love this illustration. It's an example that folks maybe have seen in the past. We're not going to talk about how the fish can talk and curse, but they don't necessarily know what water is. But the way the story goes is there are 2 young fish sort of swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, good morning, how's the water? And the 2 fish kind of swim on for a bit, and then one of them turns to the other and looks over and says, what's water? And I love this analogy for workplace culture, because each of our workplaces has a culture that is akin to, sort of the fish in water. It's that thing that surrounds you that you don't even realize you are surrounded by, because it's just the only thing you have ever known. It's the environment. And the thing about culture is that culture is not objectively right or wrong. It's simply the agreed upon norms that permeate a particular space. And one of the things that culture can do is they make dominant groups become invisible. So they make those things sort of this is just what everyone does. But they sharply highlight or create contrast for groups that maybe aren't dominant. And that's where people start to feel or experience lack of a sense of belonging, or they start to experience that sense of being other. And in different cultures or different contexts, that can easily change. So all you need to do is take a fish out of water and suddenly their context is different. They have a different reality, right? And something that was invisible now is very, very evident. The reason I like this analogy is because it highlights that there are contexts in which some groups feel readily like they can breathe and other groups feel like they're holding their breath. And so it's important for us to think about as supervisors as we make the invisible visible, to be transparent, to peel back the curtain or to peel back the layers around what is it that makes our workplace what it is, and how do we help our interns either understand those realities, even if we can't change them, or acknowledge them so that the intern understands like it's not a me thing, it's just how this space operates. So I think this is important to acknowledge, given that many of our interns and many of our young people are people of color working in what I would presume are predominantly white institutions or predominantly white spaces. And you'll see me use the PWI acronym throughout this portion of our conversation. So the first thing that we do as we engage in this is we need to break down what it means to get clear about the water. And I really love this visual because it's really kind of the characteristics of workplaces that have a particular dominant group in positions of power, which is what many of our organizations or institutions, particularly here in the Twin Cities, but really all across the country, have. These are many of sort of the agreed upon ways of working that oftentimes are invisible to us, but are certainly true. Here are some on the page that resonate with me. One is the perfectionism. As much as I try to shake it, the idea that in order to succeed, my work and by extension, I have to be perfect is a hard thing to challenge because it's so deeply ingrained in our workplace cultures. People call themselves recovering perfectionists when they introduce themselves, or you don't send the materials over until the slide deck looks exactly perfect, right? You don't sort of send things in draft form. Is this idea of perfectionism at play in our workplaces? There's one that's also not on here that I think is very accurate, sort of this idea of being busy. How many things can I sort of stack on my plate as evidence of how I define my value in the workplace, right? I don't have time for that because I'm engaged in this, because the sense of being needed. So when we break down what it means to get clear about the water, we ask ourselves and we take the time to reflect on what aspects of predominantly white institutional culture most permeates my workplace. And sometimes those are uncomfortable questions to sit with. How might it manifest in the company? What does it look like on my team? What does it look like in me as a leader? And then you get to a place where you can start to ask what gaps might exist between my interns' experiences or expectations and the culture of my company. So that, and one of the things that I would offer is not to assume that the gap means that there's something the intern has to change. Sometimes we might stumble on a gap that's like, in an ideal world, the institution might look different, but we ourselves may not be in a position to necessarily change that. So how do we simply make that visible and acknowledge it and help the intern operate within that context? One of the things that is important is that once we find that gap, it's important for us to sort of figure out what we do with it. So we don't judge the gap, but we observe. Sometimes we might observe that what the culture of the workplace expects and what my intern expects, or what their cultural experiences might be, are very different. I'll offer a couple of examples. The first one is personal. So my husband is a Minnesotan through and through. He was born in St. Paul, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, sort of just like in many ways has sort of a Minnesotan background. His values around time are shaped by that cultural context And so for him, being on time is a sign of respect. In fact, being on time is defined as being a few minutes early to everything. And just about everything is very time bound. Somewhere along the way, he must have lost his way because he ended up married to someone from the Caribbean whose sense of time couldn't be more different than his. And so my family is our orientation around time is very different. If the barbecue starts at 4, you start getting ready at 4:45, and you definitely don't want to get there before 6:30 because you're going to be asked to help set up, right? Like just completely different concept of time, but you learn to operate within the expectations of predominantly white spaces. And so that's one example. Another one is I really I really respect Twilio as an organization. They're a technology company, and they talk about shifting their relationship to data. So data is oftentimes used as a tool to validate a particular point of view. Sometimes it can also be used as a tool to invalidate a particular point of view. And it's usually held up as like someone brings a perspective forward, and the first thing we say is, well, what does the data tell us on this? And that's sort of a very values-based thing of data over qualitative or experiential stories of truth, and letting those things stand in of themselves. And so these are examples of just values that may be invisible for many of our interns or those early in their career, that we as supervisors have an opportunity to make visible, to make sense of the workplace for them, which is really important in bringing that mentorship mindset. We won't get into fear of conflict just for the sake of time, but one of the things that we can do when we identify a gap is we can sort of follow, I notice, I acknowledge, I understand, and then I'm curious about. And here's what that might sound like. I don't know if you noticed, but that meeting was very data heavy. We rely on data heavily here because, and you can kind of share how the organization views that particular value or that particular thing. I know there are many ways to gather information, so acknowledge that like it's a cultural thing and not a right or wrong. And then asking, I'm curious, what strategies do you use when you're trying to convince someone of something? Do you use stories? Do you use data? Invite them to bring a perspective that might be different, so that you're not invalidating the culture that you all have to swim in every day, but you're recognizing and making visible that you have awareness that that's not necessarily how things might operate. So that's just an example of how we might mind the gap. What I'd love for us to do is delve into our second breakout. I'm going to put the questions there. Hopefully everyone saw those come through in the chat. And it's exactly the questions that we've been talking about that I'd love the group to spend just a few minutes in. What aspects of this predominantly white institutional culture exists in your workplace, and how does it show up? And then what gaps might exist between what an intern expects or sees or knows to be true of the world versus the culture of the company? You can start anywhere. You may not get to all of those questions, but I'd love to send us into about 8 minutes of breakout there, and remember to assign your spokesperson. All right, welcome back. So let's just spend a couple of minutes. What did you all, hopefully the questions went through even while you were in your breakouts. So let's just spend a few minutes talking through how you all, what have you observed in your own organizations or institutions, or how it might manifest or show up, or any gaps that you think are worth capturing. I'd love to hear what you all discussed.
I can go. Our group talked about the sense of urgency, always feeling like you have to respond to everything right away, that like everything's like in the crisis mode at all times. And sometimes it can be hard to sort of to prioritize what to actually emphasize, or what to actually put your attention to at any given moment. The other thing we talked about was keeping busy, just this pressure or this perception that you have to do too much, or you have to do a lot to illustrate that you are that you're bringing value to your position, bringing value to your company. I think we also talked about how often, people that actually receive promotions are those that are perceived as doing a lot, because they are able to demonstrate that they can take on a lot, and so therefore they're given the promotions and things like that. And then the final thing we talked about was perfectionism, and just the pressure of being perfect, like you mentioned, but we also talked about how often though the goal should be coming up with a workable solution as opposed to a perfect solution, and then working to sort of perfect whatever the outcome is sort of in the process. So yeah, those are some of the things that we shared.
Yeah, and think about our interns coming into those cultural norms, right? And coming from school, a school or a very different cultural context, and coming into a space where that's the water they're swimming in suddenly, right? How can we make those things visible for them, or break it down, or peel back the curtain so they understand what's happening around them? Brenda, and then BDMco is what it says, but you can give us your actual name.
Hey, this is Brenda, and that's Blair, 2 B's. I wanted to add in the idea of generations as well. I mentioned there's a new book called Generations, and I got it out of the library, and I wanted to dig into it about what's going on with Generation Z, kind of to the point of maybe we have this concept of the water and we're all swimming in it, but of the different generations we may be working with, some just come in thinking flippers, nobody uses flippers anymore, right? Or whatever the different sort of attitudes or subcultural setups might be that are coming together in this pool, and how that is going to help us to maybe explain the cultures with an eye to what they're already possibly thinking or coming in with. So that might be helpful.
Yeah, you highlight something that I think is there's even like another invisibility that sits beneath what you've just said, which is this idea of like deference to how it's always been is very much like a corporate cultural element. And now you have a generation that's coming in that's like, those are not our cultural values necessarily. We will challenge how it's always been. And so workplaces are figuring out how to navigate that. But that is exactly that, like the invisible sort of becoming, coming to the surface. Blair, and then we'll move on to part 3.
Yeah, now I know how to edit. I don't use Zoom much, so so
Okay.
my name's Blair. I'll try to make this quick because I know we have another section. But we talked about meetings, right, and how they default to 1 hour all the time, right? When you're setting up a meeting, and why is that? Question that. Why can't they be a half hour? Or and all of us talked about, we do this at our organizations. There's settings within the meeting, so when you set up a meeting, it could be end at the 55 or end at the 25. But do people follow those practices? That's a whole other question. So we just went into just that whole meeting mindset, and even like the traditional 9 to 5, right? 5 o'clock rolls around, everybody heads out the door. Well, why is that? So just kind of those norms that we've kind of all grew up on. So that's kind of what we talked about.
Yeah, communication mediums are huge when you think about culture, even in workplaces. Some prefer in-person communication. Some prefer you have to have the meeting, otherwise the conversation didn't happen. And others are like, how can we write, this can be a 1-pager. We don't actually need to meet for this at all, right? And so even communication styles start to make those things visible. This portion is really around that mentorship mindset. Really means being aware of where those things are at play within our workplaces, so we can talk to our interns about them and help them understand and navigate. We don't have to take on, we cannot individually, right, overturn every single one of those things, nor are they objectively good or bad. They simply are. And so how do we help our interns effectively navigate them? Let's talk about our last one. And this one is fairly short, so we'll spend a few minutes and then we'll have about 5 minutes in breakout. I hope you are seeing, it should say part 3, be clear. Perfect. There are, when you have that foundation of trust in place and you've developed the kind of dynamic in which you are helping your intern navigate the organization, then you can do what Katie mentioned earlier in our conversation, which is get to a place where you can start to push the intern. This is where you're starting to leverage some of those withdrawals in order to get what the intern is there for, which is to deliver a great work product and to decide how they feel about a particular career path and have an experience. There are two sides of being clear or communication. The first is sort of motivating the person to do what you are asking them to do. And one of the tools that I learned when I was in the classroom, particularly with figuring out how young people are motivated, that has always stuck with me, is kind of three things have to be true. You have to, they have to believe I can do this, right? I have the ability, I'm capable. So how do you help them see that? And some of those introductory remarks that we mentioned earlier are the deposits that get you there. They also have to believe I want to do this, right? So helping provide context for them. Why is this important? What's the result of this work? Where does this work ladder up to? What's the result of this work going to be? So being transparent and putting it in context for them as much as possible. And then last, I will do this, right? So that's where you help them. You actually help roadmap for them what doing it looks like by breaking it down into smaller, more manageable chunks and milestones where they can check in along the way. Then as you communicate, and the I will do this naturally follows over to the communication. So what I'm going to share, I don't think is groundbreaking in terms of ensuring that any project your intern has has these components around it. So here's what I need. And I've made a couple of offered in parentheses places where you may need to repeat yourself a few times. Sort of 8 times 8 ways applies very much. So here's what you're looking for, and providing examples so that the intern really understands, like, this is what you mean. And making sure that you have captured their understanding of the task and it aligns with yours. You might provide context as to here's why I need it, so transparency where possible. Here's when I need it, and this is a great opportunity to both deposit and extract at the same time. So what do you think is reasonable in terms of timeline? How long do you think it would take you to complete this task? Or how much time do you want for this? When would you like me to check in with you next? And so engaging in a collaborative process of deciding on deadline. And then here's how I need it. So give them format, give them templates, or tell them who they should partner with in order to deliver. And then here's how I'll support you. So let's break this work into manageable chunks. I'll provide you feedback at these milestones. One of the best ways to provide feedback, particularly to a young person, is to let them know it's coming so that it's just built into the process as opposed to surprising them along the way. I'm going to challenge your thinking. So I'm going to ask you some questions so we can, really refine this and then help them own the outcome. So I'm going to put the questions for our final breakout in the chat. And we'll spend 5 minutes on this one, which is, I'd love to just invite you with your groups to spend a few minutes thinking about what you're planning for your intern to do this summer, or what you have already asked them to begin doing, maybe an upcoming or an existing task. And have you activated the I can, I want, and I will, all 3 of those components? And do you have an opportunity to capture one of these spaces to be even more clear in your communication? So I'll invite you one last time into breakouts, and then we'll come back together and close out our time. All right, we've got time for 1 or 2 thoughts. Anything that struck you in your breakout conversations as you think about being clear and sort of activating that I can, I want, I will experience for your interns?
I'll say something if nobody else will. I've been a job coach for a long time, and I always try to go with the crawl, walk, run phase. I always take my person I'm mentoring, and very methodical about, I don't have great expectations for you this first couple of weeks. You're just going to be learning. And then that's the crawl phase, and the walk phase is we're walking through building something together. And then the run phase is I let the intern go and they're independent. And one of the things I caught off your slide was for clear communication, putting milestones in. And I think I should do a better at signifying what those milestones should be between the crawl, walk, and run phases.
Yeah. Here's what I'll see so that I know you're ready to walk. And here's what I'll see so that I know you're ready to run. I love that. Great. One more thought. Nicholas.
Yeah, like going off from what Wayne was saying, it's good to have like a crawl, walk, let go kind of set of milestones. But what I was thinking as well is to be accommodating. Yeah, don't cross any boundaries with them as well. You know, you can be as clear as you want with them, but sometimes if something doesn't meet their needs, you got to just accept that and work with that and just find a new way to solve that problem. Just because 2 + 2 = 4 doesn't mean that they might think it's 4. Sometimes you got to make it 3 + 1 for them. So you guys got to be as accommodating as possible and treat them with as much respect as you like to be treated with. And if some things don't work, you can draw off the foundation that you built with the supervisor and use this foundation that you built with the intern as well, and speak to both of them and go over a way that whatever their problem is, that they can help accommodate them with whatever resources that you have.
Thank you both so much for the comments. I think I set myself up really nicely for the poor time management, given that we have about 2 minutes left in terms of my own relationship to time. But I so appreciated the engagement and the conversation. What I'll end with is one of the quotes that has always stuck with me from my time in the classroom is the belief that everyone wants to succeed. And as long as the conditions are there, people will experience that success. And so I hope that you're taking a nugget or two away to bring your interns a little bit closer to a successful summer, and for you as supervisors to experience and feel success as well after the experience. Thank you again to Jeremiah and Heidi and Achieve for creating the space for us to have some time together and engage and collectively grow. So I'll turn things back over to Jeremiah.
Oh, thanks so much, Shamayne, for putting this all together and hosting this conversation with us. I personally gained so much from this session. Appreciate the opportunity to reflect on my practice as a supervisor and mentor and consider new concepts and frameworks while gaining great insights from Shamayne and many of you who are sharing. I'll keep it brief there because we only have 1 minute left. I want to thank everyone so much for coming. We have 2 more great sessions coming up for our summer DEI learning series. On Monday, July 10th, Dr. Abdul Omari will lead a session on understanding and using cultural intelligence, exploring key concepts and cultural intelligence frameworks as a way to better connect with others. And then on Tuesday, July 25th, Dr. Omari returns to lead a session on creating and fostering inclusive workspaces. We would love to see you all back with us for these sessions and encourage you to share these opportunities with your colleagues. The registration link is in the chat or will be momentarily if it's not already. We can also register through that QR code. We encourage you all to come back and join us and hopefully bring along a couple of your colleagues and folks that work with your interns and you this summer. Again, thank you, Shamayne, for leading us through all this. Thank you to our guests for joining and being part of this interactive discussion. If you have any further questions or want to follow up, my email is on the screen and you can always circle back to whoever invited you out to this event. Thanks so much and look forward to seeing you on July 10th. Take care. Have a great day.